Zora and Me, Chapter 8. Zora had to go to Joe Clark's store after school the next day to pick up some flour and sugar for her mother, so we walked Teddy home, even though it was hardly the most direct route. Zora and I always liked going to the farm. Before they were our age, Teddy's older brothers, Jake and Micah, had been pulled out of school for good to work the farm. By the time Teddy and us were in school, the farm was thriving, and Teddy's parents decided to give their youngest son the chance none of the rest of them had gotten. Teddy was lucky, and he knew it. I don't know if that's why Teddy tried so hard in school and did so well, but I never got the sense that his brothers resented his good luck. If anything, they seemed extra proud of him, but not so proud that they didn't love to tease him. When we got there, Jake and Micah were hoisting bales of cured tobacco leaves onto the wagon. "Oh, nice of you to get home just in time for us to be finished with the hard work." Micah elbowed Jake in the ribs. "And look," Jake said, "he's brought his two little lady friends with him." Jake pretended to doff a hat he wasn't wearing. "How y'all doing today, ladies?" "Fine," we said, laughing despite ourselves. Micah put his arm around Teddy's shoulder, like a minister giving advice to a wayward boy. "Now, brother, how many times do we have to tell you that the law don't like a man to marry two women?" Jake looked up from pulling the straps tight on the mule's bridle. "It ain't fittin'." "That's right," said Micah, "it ain't fittin'." And as he saw Teddy's mama come out from the farmhouse, he added, for her benefit, "Besides, one woman ought to be more than enough. Look how much trouble Daddy has with Mama. She don't never do what he wants her to do, unless she wanted to do it herself already." Zora and I tried to keep our giggles to ourselves, but we didn't have to worry, because Jake and Micah were howling with laughter. Even Mrs. Baker was smirking a little herself. "If y'all quit ham-boning around and get going," she said, "we might get that tobacco to Lake Matlin in time for the train. Meantime, neither of y'all has to worry about getting married until you find a girl who can get you in a harness next to that mule where you belong, and then let's hope she can tell you apart." Everybody laughed at that, Micah and Jake included. It was one of the things I liked so much about Teddy's family. They liked each other's company. They kidded each other, but never to hurt. If the kidding didn't amuse the one being kidded, that would mean they'd gotten it wrong, but I never saw that happen. After Mrs. Baker sent Jake and Micah on their way, she brought Zora, Teddy, and me into the kitchen and gave us each a thick slice of bread, still warm from the oven, smeared with creamy butter made from their own cow's milk. In the time it took us to eat, she grilled us all on what we were doing in school, what was coming up, how we were going to study, if we were going to go to high school like Teddy was, and so on. It was nice. It reminded us that school had a purpose beyond the day-to-day, even if we didn't know yet where it would take us. And when we were done, she sent us on our way. "So you can do your chores, and Teddy can do his, and y'all still have time to do your studying after supper." We all grinned at that. Zora loved to read so much, it hardly felt like studying to her, unlike me and Teddy, who had to work real hard to stay at the top of the class with her. My chore for the afternoon was accompanying Zora to Joe Clark's. Mrs. Hurston might have sent a list with Zora, but Zora was interested in too many other things to be sure to get every item on it, and that's where I came in. I did all the pulling down from shelves, while Zora poked her ears and dipped her mind into grown folks' business, then shared everything she learned with me. Besides groceries and general items, Joe Clark's store had more than its share of tall tales and greasy talk. The aisles might have been lined with household goods, but the air was full of the kind of ideas and words respectable ladies wouldn't dare let in their houses, not in the light of day, anyway. So Zora sucked all that adult life right up, smiling, giggling, and listening hard the whole time. I couldn't help but give her sideways looks. Tall talk wasn't for me, but I knew it was part of why Eatonville thrived. We lived in a community without strangers, and the men's stories always felt like the next installment of a good serial. The usual group of menfolk was on the porch when we came skipping up the walk, and they talked loud as usual, whooping and hollering in a major key. Joe Clark stood against the post looking right as rain. His marshal badge gleamed in the sunlight, and his pistol sat on his lap. "Why, hello, Carrie," Mr. Clark said, "and hello, Zora." We helloed him back, somewhere between polite and shy. Joe Clark was a big man, but it wasn't his bigness that made us a little shy. Zora's father was just as tall, but I always believed that Joe Clark was not only the strongest and bravest man in town, but the smartest. After my father, he was also the gentlest and the kindest. "It's been heard all around town this day that you two are mighty deservin' children, Miss Zora Neale Hurston and Miss Carrie Brown," Mr. Clark said. "Mighty deservin'." He poked out his already protruding belly, and he snapped his red suspenders. The gold chain of his pocket watch swayed on the hip opposite his pistol. "Mighty deserving? What for? We didn't win any spelling bee." Zora smiled. "Not yet, anyway." She gave me a wink. She prided herself on knowing more words than anybody in the school, teachers possibly included, and knowing how to spell them to boot, but she never talked fancy without a good reason. Girls, y'all been pegged for doing something a whole lot more important than spelling some words out. If it wasn't for you two, old Lady Bronson might still be lying where she fell down at Blue Sink. Zora looked up at Joe Clark. You believe she fell, Mr. Clark? Joe Clark's eyebrows rose quizzically. Well, way I heard it, she had a little fainting spell. It obviously hadn't occurred to him to question the story. Old Lady Bronson tell you that? I didn't know what Zora was thinking, but I could see the gears spinning. Why, no, it was Mr. Calhoun told me, but one of the men on the porch interrupted him. Hey, Marshall, I didn't know you hired yourself a deputy. That brought a round of chuckles, but I could tell they were curious just the same. Zora, though, didn't have a speck of laughing in her. Joe Clark saw that, and I watched him put his own smile in his pocket as he sat down on the little end of the bench to face Zora eye to eye. Let's see now. Dave Calhoun come in real early this morning with a cracked shoe on the right front of that paint mule of his. He said old Lady Bronson was fishing at Blue Sink yesterday and had a fainting spell. He put his hand up to hold off any protest Zora might have made. I'm just telling you what I heard. He said she likely had a fainting spell on that little ledge that comes out and fell straight over onto the rocks, and that's where y'all found her. Said another couple of feet and she would have landed in the water and drowned for sure. She was banged up real good as it was, he said. But the whole thing I'm trying to say, the whole reason I brought this up, is that old Lady Bronson would probably still be there if it hadn't been for you. Now he allowed himself a smile, but Zora didn't. She drew herself up like she was about to recite for class and said, Mr. Clark, I don't think old Lady Bronson fainted or even just slipped. There was some noise from the porch, but Mr. Clark waved his hand like a preacher asking for a moment of silence. You don't? What you think, then? No, sir. I think a gator knocked her onto those rocks with his tail. That's what I think. I warned her to. Carrie was there. She'll tell you. I said, that's right. But Zora was still talking, so I don't think anybody heard me. I even told my mama about it. Since you the marshal, I guess I should have told you. Zora took a deep breath. I saw Mr. Pender turn into a gator with my own 2 eyes. He was out at the Blue Sink night before last, and I saw Mr. Pender standing on his porch with a gator snout instead of a head. For an instant, I had a feeling that the whole porch was about to explode laughing. But no, aside from a single snort and a tongue click, there was just a bunch of grins. The porch didn't take Zora's accusations about Mr. Pender seriously, but they understood that we were serious. Joe Clark understood best of all. Now, Zora, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen very good. You too, Carrie. You both listening? Yes, sir, Zora said. I'm listening. I bobbed my head. It ain't nice to say things like that about folks, especially old, lonely folks. Pender, he don't have no place on that wrinkled face to hide a thing like being something other than what he is. Y'all understand? Most folks only got so many hiding places, and I'm afraid old Pender's face ain't one of his. Well, what is my face telling you, Mr. Clark? Zora was fearless, and sometimes her courage was so bold it spilled onto me and pushed away my fear for at least a second. Joe Clark got eye level with us. I see what's called a Zora on your face. She beamed like the sun had an extra ray just for her, and what's on yours, he said to me, is something called Carrie. I got my own ray, too. What you see is Zora, Zora repeated slowly, as if she were hearing her own name for the first time. That's right, girl. And Zora saved that old lady just the same as if Zora picked her up off those rocks and carried her home herself. She did? Joe Clark smiled. She did. Mr. Eddie Jackson, a short, skinny man with nutmeg skin, tipped his hat at us. Good job. A thin, greasy-haired man named Mr. Slayton asked, what the grown men do around these parts if little girls gonna be the ones saving folks? What the grown men got to do then, Joe Clark said, is give the little girls as much licorice as they can eat. He opened the screen door of his store for us, went behind the counter, and pulled out a nearly full box of licorice sticks. Ladies, have as many as you like. We had no shame. Zora began to fill the pockets of her shift with the sweet, twisty whips. I followed suit, and when we got through with cramming our dress pockets, we put as many of the sticks as we could on the inside of our knee socks, stuffing what didn't fit there into our shoes. Zora tried walking a few steps and found that she couldn't, not so much because her feet hurt as because walking threw too much of the candy clear out of her shoes. So she took off her bucks and filled them with the licorice, too, like little Easter baskets. More room without my feet, she said. You want your licorice sticks tasting like feet? I asked. Mr. Clark laughed like a good-natured giant. Shucks, I don't hardly wear my shoes no way, Zora answered. Stumped for an answer to that, I sucked on a licorice stick. Just then, Chester Cools rode up to the store on his sad old mule. "An awful thing happened, Joe," Mr. Cools muttered. "Awful thing."